The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought we were boxing.
All right. So we have none other than Academy Award nominated filmmaker, the world's first and maybe only billion-dollar documentarian, and the creative force behind one of the best surf films of all time. It'd have to be considered the best by many, including myself, Five Summer Stories. Greg MacGillivray, welcome to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm so excited we get to talk to you today. But, you know, first things first, let's little scene set. Where are you today? Who are you hanging out with?
Well, I'm at our office in Laguna Beach and just finished watching some dailies about a shoot that we just did in Singapore.
Oh, wow.
And we were down there for about 3 weeks doing a film about the future of cities. And
oh, wow.
Singapore is a great example of architecture and design and thoughtful conservation, actually, where they're bringing water elements and forest elements into the city so that you don't feel quite as trapped in the canyons of concrete. And so we all were down there a month ago shooting. And so you watch the dailies and you sit real close to the screen now that we're doing IMAX almost exclusively.
Right.
And do a grade screening where you're dictating what your reaction is to these images on the big screen so that when you edit them on a little computer, you could hear the reaction that you had back when you were seeing it big. And going big is really a hard thing for a creative person to figure out. You can't intellectually jump that far in your mind, especially when you're also watching things on cell phones and computer screens. And so it's really important to remember what the big image looks like, the 8K image where your pixels are beautiful, and so it's an interesting, really interesting process now that we're all digital.
Totally, and it's such a, depending on the medium, it has so much potential to transform exactly what you're watching. Kind of like you were saying, where if it goes that big, it engenders a completely different emotion than it would be if you're watching on your iPhone like that.
Absolutely,
and I'm really interested to get into that with you too. But yeah, go please, yeah.
Well, that's the joy of it, the seeing, like even seeing surfing. We did a sequence in the Living Sea and in Wild California, one at Mavericks, where we shot from the air in IMAX, and you saw things that you never even see as a surfer. The churning of the water behind the wave, and these gigantic boils that surfers are riding over. You see them in IMAX, and you see that skill that a surfer has when he's riding a wave, 6 feet or 60 feet. It's really amazing in IMAX.
It's something else, and it's so. I mean, we didn't plan on starting here, but since we did, I'm interested in getting your take on it. I have 8-year-old twins, and we recently went to that California Adventure Park, and they have a ride there called Soaring, which is on a huge screen. And, it's like you're with your kids, it's the park, you're tired. And I'm like, man, I don't want to wait in line for this thing. It's not going to be that good. And I was like completely changed after the film. I'm like, this is incredible because it's just this amazing footage on a huge screen. And I thought, man, if I'd watched that on my phone, I would have been right to be, judgmental of it. But it's just the format changes everything.
Oh, yeah. And that, because you're lifted off the ground and your feet are dangling.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of those films. In fact, when Disney did that, they consulted with us, and so that's kind of our forte over the last many decades. doing things that take the audience in a strange new way somewhere else.
I love it. And I want to dig into that. But first, I do want to, I'm going to have to contain myself during this conversation because as long as I've been into surfing, which is a long time now, I've always been a fan. But the recent re-explorations of your work have really illuminated for me just how impactful you were for me during my formative years. I think Five Summer Stories was the first VHS film I bought. I was 11. And then as we were getting ready for the podcast today, I'm like, you know what? I wonder. And I pulled open a box and I'm like, I have the receipt. I have my copy. It was here. It's here. It's within arm's reach all the time. And we're here in part because it's been 50 years since the original release, which is just incredible. What are your thoughts about that first and foremost?
Well, first, you wonder where those 50 years went.
Right, yeah.
Pushed all kinds of things into those 50 years, but they went by so quickly. And the thing that I get out of watching the film again, and we spent about 6 months re-editing the film and redoing the sound so it'd be even better. In the final version is slightly different than the last version that we showed to audiences in theaters. I think it's the best version. I think it's tighter and it's more interesting. But you end up looking at the surfing that was done 50 years ago, and you go, "Well, that was pretty amazing." And whether it's Lopez riding in the tube or Barry, getting speed out of a wave that's just a rocket ship. You really do get a sense of, well, these guys were amazing athletes and doing things that people just hadn't even thought about yet. That was my biggest reaction. And then I got a sense, of course, of the joy of just reliving that moment in history 50 years ago. A lot was happening 50 years ago in our society, in surfing, and in the world. And it's interesting to relive that and learn by it.
It's interesting you brought that up too, because that's one of the notes I jotted down upon rewatching in preparation for this conversation. And just while it's not a one-to-one, like similar parallels, just societal temperature coming out of the 60s into the 70s, and a ton of kind of unrest, socially speaking, and flash forward to today, 50 years later, and it's maybe not for the same exact reasons, but quite a lot of unrest. And it did feel like one of the messages of the film and one of the tension points it was wrestling with was the idea that surfing is such a beautiful escape for those who seek it out, but then that tension point of surfing wrestling with itself under capitalism, right? And commodification and competitive surfing. And I'm wondering if that stuck out to you when you were kind of re-editing the film, if you felt like there were any kind of social or cultural parallels between when you made the film and now.
Well, there are. And I don't think that will ever change, where, the joy and serenity and kind of almost a Zen-like purity that you get out of being in the water and feeling, the ocean's waves lift you and drop you as you're waiting for the next big swell. That kind of connection is, as we state at the beginning of the film, surfer finds the purity and the simplicity of life in the ocean, and he gets separated from the shore in a way that's further than the distance that he's actually paddled.
Right.
He could be 100 miles out into the ocean, but because he feels that separation from civilization and society and the things that are going wrong and the things that are going right, but it's just out of his mind because he's in nature. And you end up seeing the film, and because that's our central message, that's the message that we start with and we end with. But as we go through a lot of the tribulations that are happening on shore, whether it be the Vietnam War or the competition
Sure. Yeah.
question. Are surfers being treated fairly by the money interests, by the cities that are throwing contests that are making tens of thousands of dollars, and surfers are getting a little teeny trophy. It's worth about $1.50. Those are the things that we wanted to point out back then. And of course, before the Surfrider Foundation was invented, we wanted to point out that surfers were losing their waves. And whether it be a freeway, pushing out into the water to create a faster lane, and wiping out Stanley's Diner, Stanley's surfing spot below Santa Barbara,
Right.
Or Trestle being closed off because Nixon was there, or you losing something like Dana Point Harbor.
Yeah.
Dana Point, Killer Dana was a great surfing spot that my dad and my sister and I used to surf almost weekly, and it was wiped out. It wasn't even considered to save the surf spot. I mean, today that there would be riots. Surfrider would get everyone agitated, and there'd be enough power to push back, just as they did with extension of the toll road that was going to wipe out part of Trestles. There was enough pushback organized by Surfrider to stop that. But back then, 50 years ago, there was no Surfrider, and really very other little concern for surfers.
And it's interesting you bring that up too, because there's almost in some situations an inverse of that. Today, you look at a town like Coolangatta that, is deliberately building, has deliberately built through sand migration, a world-class wave for economic purposes, right? And 50 years ago, that was not even a consideration. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's just one of those things where it's just changed so much.
Well, it's definitely right. If you're
it's better than the alternative, right? Yeah, of course.
You make me want to go there. I haven't been there.
Yeah. There's this incredible. The film is so good. Like, and I'm so glad that we're talking, because I got to rewatch it again, and I loved it so much. And there is so many good segments to it, and I want to get into a couple of those. But during the competitive surfing part of it, there's a voiceover. And I'll read the voiceover as best I could jot it down. But the quote was, competition is glorified so that man may create his own myths. Competition is the backbone of the commercial side of surfing. It has nothing whatsoever to do with surfers riding waves. And, it's maybe a little bit of an awkward conversation given I work at the World Surf League and have for 17 years. But I am always fascinated by the genesis of competitive surfing, professional surfing, which for our intents and purposes happened around 1976. So just a little bit after this film came out, and watching kind of what you could almost consider like a prehistory version of competitive surfing, and how Wild West it was, changing rules, middle of the heat. It is, I was laughing hysterically, not by comparison, but just at how high comedy some of the scenes were, and these surfers trying to kind of mold themselves into this commercial vessel to perpetuate their own careers.
Yeah, and you can tell that when in the interview sequences that we've done there at Huntington Beach, I think that was 1971 September or something like that, and when we did that, you can tell the kind of uneasiness of the surfer. Right. They didn't really know how to approach competition. They knew it would bring them some fame, but they didn't know how to deal with it. It was just something that they casually got into and hadn't really thought that much about. It's like Jericho Poplar's brother is in there saying, "Well, they give you a free bar of wax."
It's such a good comment. So good.
And I love that, and then Johnny Fain says something about, well, you could try your maneuvers by stabbing your buddy in the back and making him feel really good when he gets out of the water. All of that. In fact, that's kind of the shortened version of that sequence. When I first released it, I was even more intense, and um, several commercial interests threatened to sue us
Right.
over the comments that we'd made, and
Proving out your original point, I'm sure.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
all honest,
Right.
nothing made up. But and so rather than um, go to court with them, which I think we would have won, because we do have a right of free speech here. But you end up, so we shortened different sequences, and then Corky um, thought he kind of looked silly, complaining so much, and I said, Corky, you were screwed. Yes, you should be complaining. He says, oh, I know, but you made me look so mean. And so I said, okay, well, let's go in, and I'll cut a few lines out. And so and I went to the editing table, and so the first version was that prime version, and it was
Right.
probably a minute and a half longer than the more sanitized version. But we still kept a lot of the hard editing stuff, which wasn't offensive to any commercial sponsors.
Well, and I think to an extent, and I had the good fortune of working under Wayne Rabbit Bartholomew when I started. He was the ASP president at the time, and he cited this film amongst a few other pieces about that tension that you were bringing to light in this film of, hey, there is a purist version of surfing that it's about getting good waves and surfing your best, and then there's this early nascent kind of, like baby deer, struggling to walk version of competitive surfing. Rabbit's vision of the Dream Tour was intended to bridge that gap as best he could, in the sense of like, hey, if we're going to do a sport that claims to have the world's best anything, you have to have these elements. Otherwise, what are you doing? And it really made an impact, obviously, because it's a competitive surfing's. I'd like to think a little bit different. Unfortunately, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of similarities still in this film, but I think it's probably in a better place than it was in 1971.
Yeah. No, I think with competitive surfing, I think where they've come today is a really good place, and it's a matter of all the surfers who are at top notch are aware of what they're getting into. It's a fair deal.
Right.
They end up understanding the consequences, all the costs. Whereas way back then, everyone was pretty naive. And so today you wouldn't really make the same argument. You'd make maybe other arguments and hopefully things would get better. But today, thankfully surfers are now making a living, and some of them making a very good living. And so I'm jazzed. I think that's so good. It should be the way it is.
Going back to the times that you produced this film in, like, it felt like so much change socially and culturally, and you could even see it like in some of those really early clips of like a young Nat Young or a young Corky Carroll or a young David Nuiva, whether it was sort of 60s versions of them into the 70s, and you could see even how their aesthetic changed. And it was just a really cool part of the film where you're like, oh wow, like look at how they're being led by cultural change, and probably in a lot of cases leading cultural change just by virtue of who they are.
It's true. Surfers have always been kind of the risk takers of society, and whether it be, trying a sport that everyone kind of rejected, and we were outliers, in the late 50s and early 60s. It wasn't a cool thing to be a surfer. And then it became cool, and people from inland started coming down, and so you ended up with a group of people that were willing to go without a job, just to get to the waves, go without money, a good car, a beautiful girlfriend, make sacrifices because they loved the sport so much. They loved being in the water. They loved being close to nature in a way that was so much fun. And you see that in those characters, like you said, where we show their change of hairstyle and clothing, and just their vibe had changed so radically. Because we had images, some done by Bud Brown and some done by Jim and I, going back 15 years. And so in 72, when the film came out, we tried to portray where society was at that particular moment. And the writer of the film, Drew Campion, didn't come up with the ideas for the stories. That was Jim and I. But the narration and the way it was written, and the line that you quoted was written by Drew, and because he and we were thinking about the same things at the same time. He was a more critical journalist than just about anyone who's been in the surfing industry, um, and trying to probe what it all could mean and what it all could be in the future. And that's at that beginning stage of where we've come in the past 50 years. It's nice to look back and see, okay, that's where we more or less started. And that's what that sequence Sea Changes is all about. It not only takes the Beach Boys music, and the Beach Boys were so generous and wonderful, offering all their library to me for free.
Right.
And so I was able to use their earliest surf songs all the way through Feel Flows and Surf's Up, which was their latest album, which came out in 72 and was album of the year. And so I decided, okay, let's do the story Sea Changes and make it a comical thing, but serious in a way too.
Right.
And no, very little narration, if any. Just let the music and the visual imagery carry you through.
I'm glad you brought the music piece up too, because even our producer Miguel and I were laughing about it. We're like, we got to ask him about how he got the music, because as you pointed out, the Beach Boys and Honk and getting the rights to those, just to use that in content today is probably like a Herculean, if not impossible task. Oh, yeah. But I'd imagine that because of your relationships with people in those circles and because of the actual content of the film, it was probably easier to get them to work with you. And the second comment, in rewatching this, I'm like, oh my God, I forgot how good this song is. This song's so good. And I'm sending them to my friends, using like Spotify and saying, hey, check this out. And everyone's the same comment. They go, I had no idea the Beach Boys sounded like this, and I'm like, yeah, it's really cool. It's just that it's got to be up there with some of the best soundtracks ever.
And that's what I always would enjoy every year when we re-release the film, and sometimes added new sequences. But the film played in theaters from 72 to 79, so 7 years. And the reason we kept bringing it back is the demand was there. People would run into us on the street and say, "You've got to re-release it. My daughter, and she needs to see it." And
right.
And so the demand was there, and so we kept doing it. And then I kept adding new updates, like a Sean Thompson sequence and a skateboarding sequence in 76 and so forth. And you end up with versions that are, additive and kind of keeping it fresh, but still having the underlying form of the original film. That was really fun to do. And keep going.
Oh no, I was just going to say, one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm curious to get your take on whether this was just an accurate portrayal of what it was like at the time, or if the film was really ahead of its time, is that in the second story is an entire segment dedicated to women surfing. You have your Lynn Boyers and your Margot Obergs, and Margot speaks so beautifully. I think as long as I've been at the ASPWSL, which is 17 years now, I've been quoting her, relaxed and stylish, style, punch and bite when we talk about the real positive attributes of women surfing in a way that makes it distinct. And And, you know, I think historically, if you look at it, and I've talked to a bunch of women surfers as well over the years, whether it's Lane Beachley, et cetera. And, you know, in the 80s, it's almost like women's surfing caved in on itself a little bit, probably because it was chasing, you know, commerciality and competitive surfing, which were not necessarily at Sunset Beach or Haleiwa or some of these other big wave spots. But I remember, you know, in the mid-aughties when we brought the championship tour back to the North Shore for the women, and this was a big part of the narrative because a lot of the women that were the best women surfers in the world at the time had never really even surfed Sunset Beach, you know, and that was kind of the place for women surfing in the 70s. It was just really interesting, and I'm curious to get your read on that.
And the Women in Motion sequence wasn't in the very first version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was an additive thing that I did later. Once, you know, when Margot hit the scene and ripped that year at Haleiwa,
yeah,
I think it was the Smirnoff or some contest. I thought, oh gosh, you know, we've got to get a sequence on that. And you know, up until that moment, you know, girls weren't doing big wave ripping, and then Lynn Boyer at the same time was doing small wave ripping, kind of like men surfers were doing on smaller waves, where the small boards were just all over the place. And you know, she was very stylish and graceful, and so I had the footage. Bud Brown continued to surf. Shoot surfing. Once we finished Five Summer Stories, then a couple of years later, we brought out Going Surfing, and I helped edit that with Bud. And then we re-edited that into the new Going Surfing, and that came out in probably 74 or 75. And then Free Ride came out, 76 or 77, which was another big moment in surfing films. But meanwhile, Five Summer Stories is continuing to show in a full schedule each one of those years. One of those years, and I can't remember exactly whether it was 73 or 74, Women in Motion was put together.
Okay.
And I was able to do that. And, you know, Margot's a dear friend, and so she drove all the way down, and we recorded her narration. And Jericho is one of my best friends, and she, you know, we had a wonderful sequence with her, and then we compared that with what Linda Benson and Joyce Hoffman and others were doing. You know, Marge Calhoun were doing earlier, and that transformation, looking at Marge, where she was just basically on a big log standing there, to what Lynn and Jericho and Margot were doing on smaller boards was stunning and so evident. And it really, I know all of the women who, I mean, I would really rather travel around with women than men.
Sure, yeah.
It was always fun for me when we were hired to do surfing contests. And you know, I always said I would hang out with the women surfers, but the reaction that they had when that sequence came out was really super positive, and I was so joyful that I was able to include it, that we were able to push that message forward, and get people to appreciate the beauty of what they were all doing.
Absolutely. And I think it unquestionably inspired so many generations of young surfers, both men and women. So you guys are having a premiere or a screening, right, at the Coast Film and Music Festival on Sunday, November 13th. And Honk, who features heavily on the soundtrack, they're going to play. That is incredible.
This is an interesting experiment, because obviously a good deal of the music, about a third of the music, is the Beach Boys.
Right.
And so what we did is I re-edited the film for that special screening. We'll have a screening of the movie as it sits today in that final version that I mentioned, at the Hobie Surf Shop in Laguna, on Wednesday night.
Okay.
And then on Sunday, we'll have the concert and the movie playing behind the band, the band Honk. So the 6 members of that band are going to be up on stage, and we're rehearsing it, but getting it to be absolutely in sync and getting the movie to make any sense to the audience without the voiceover is going to be interesting.
Right.
And so there's times that I'll have the microphone and I'll kind of lead the audience, and there'll be a lot of experimentation going on. I think it'll be fun. The band is so good. I don't know if you've ever heard them in concert.
They're amazing, and I recommend everyone check it out. And honestly, that experimentation kind of harkens back to your original comment about just thinking in big ideas, whether that's format or even experimentation. So I think that's going to be really exciting. We are gonna take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, but we will be right back. So usually in this part of the podcast, we do kind of a deep dive on your biography and this is your life, but I'm not going to step on it too much because you actually have a beautiful memoir, like full photos and incredibly well written, coming out called 500 Summer Stories: A Life in IMAX, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But just some general kind of context for the listeners. You grew up not too far from where you reside today, isn't that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Corona Del Mar, in the southern part of Corona Del Mar in Corona Highlands. And my buddies and I used to hike the same mountains that I mountain bike today, and it's still preserved as part of the Laguna Greenbelt. And it's it's one of those things where you always expect, at least I expected it, and my father and mom did, that all the hills would be covered with houses by now.
Right.
And somehow enough conservationists here in Laguna and elsewhere got together and saved the mountains and saved the seashore. And, we've got a marine protected area offshore, 7 miles, goes 3 miles out, no take zones. So I see more when I'm diving now or swimming out in front of our house at Dahlia Street. I see more animals than I've ever seen.
Oh, wow.
And I've lived at the same place for 50 years.
You're right.
So it's a really outstanding success story in conservation, where Laguna Beach has saved their oceans and saved their hillsides.
That's great to hear. I mean, I grew up in, Mission Viejo, San Juan Capistrano, so not very far away from that. But I would probably say that those areas, at least from one person's perspective, have seen a lot of development. And, I live up in Ventura County now, and it's an agriculture county. And that's a county that's wrestling with its identity too. And it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, maybe if you look at strict numbers and finance, maybe there's more money in sort of building on top of these natural areas, but it completely, I'm going to say, corrupts the actual kind of identity of that place that was there before. So it's great to hear that, Laguna Beach and has had that kind of identity of conservation and preservation.
Yeah. And it thankfully there are groups that have started, and a lot of this started right when 5 Summer Stories was made.
Right.
With the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the EPA was invented. Those things are still the things that we rely on as conservationists to sue the polluters, get rid of those people who basically are cheating us out of what we're supposed to have. Clean water, clean air, clean ocean. And you end up being so thankful that, starting in about 1970, when we first saw the Earth from space, from Apollo, I think it was Apollo 10 that shot that image of the Earth hanging above the lunar lem, they call it, the edge of the moon. You got that sense of, okay, we're on this planet and we're all alone. we're so far away from anything else, including the moon, that we've got to care for this place. It's our own little spaceship that we have to care for. And the conservation effort began, and that consciousness is still, it's actually stronger today among young people than it was back in 1970. And so I'm encouraged that we're going in the right direction, that the earth will be a healthier place in years future than it is today.
Well, that's good to hear.
Even
from
in
you
Ventura.
anyway. Yeah. No, of course. Yeah. I'm very proud to live in Ventura. I think it's an awesome community. But listening to you talk about growing up, diving on the coastline or exploring the hills, it's easy to see where your love of the outdoors came from. But talk about the storytelling element of your life and career. Was that something that was always there for you? How did that come to be?
Well, in a degree, I learned storytelling from my dad, who was a great storyteller. And because I worked with my dad, he was a contractor. He built single houses in Laguna. And, I was in charge of moving the lumber stacks and cleaning up the job sites, all the menial jobs, terrible jobs. In the middle of the summer, dig a trench 2 feet deep, a foot wide from here, 40 feet down. That was my job, using a shovel. It's a terrible job. But it paid me $1.50 an hour, and after every day's work, I could buy a roll of film. So that was my motivation. I needed film. And whenever I would work with him, he would tell stories to people. And I studied that, and I learned from, the setup, the way you have to set up the story and engage the characters with whoever the listener was. And then you had your middle ground, and then you had your payoff. So you had a beginning, middle, and an end to any story. And you better have a point or a joke or something happening. And so I learned that. And then as time went on, I worked with really wonderful writers, including Drew Campion and people like Steve Judson, who worked at our company for over 40 years. These people that are so good with the word and so good with getting emotion from storytelling. People want to be touched by what they go through, whether it be a good surfing contest or a good film or a good poem. They want to be touched in a way that they feel it in their heart, and they feel it in their brain, and they sense that they're learning something from the experience, something that impacts them and can make them better. And so I've tried to do that with all of our films, and the films that I love the most are the ones that I get the most emotional with. The films that tell deep stories and go into a subject in a way that hasn't been done before.
Right.
Whether it be our film about Everest, or a film about the oceans, or a film about cities or engineering, even trying to tell stories that are people related stories that truly do move you and make you think, and perhaps even get young people to open a book and explore further.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that last point too, because as you were articulating that, I was thinking about our earlier part of the conversation, just talking about how mediums can have such an impact on people. And I think, like technology is so ubiquitous across everybody today, where it's like everyone just has an iPhone, everyone just opens up Twitter, and I'm guilty of this myself. But I'd imagine, when you first got your camera, it was not a common piece of technology. And for someone like yourself, it probably developed a very unique viewpoint, no pun intended, but we can use it if we want, viewpoint on how to use that technology and how to tell story through, because it wouldn't have been as common back then, I don't think. Is that fair?
Yeah. And, I'm kind of a technical guy. So, I've always loved science and exploration. And so my first camera I would take apart and put back together, and animation was one of the special effects that I could do. And so my first film, A Cool Wave of Color, has, gosh, probably 25 animations in it, short little things that I could do with my limited artistic ability, but would be fun to watch. So those were my special effects. I could, they might take 10 hours to shoot, but I had 10 hours.
Sure. Yeah. I'm time rich.
Yeah.
Growing up in Southern California and having your interests, did you have an eye towards Hollywood and that industry? And I guess it probably is like Hollywood's probably like a loaded term these days. But I guess what I mean is you're in geographical proximity to like the filmmaking capital of the planet. Did that capture your attention at a young age from a career standpoint?
No, it didn't. Because, well, first of all, I didn't really expect filmmaking to be my career.
All right.
I was at Santa Barbara studying physics, and that's when my first film came out, was that freshman year. And it wasn't until the film got a lot of people interested, and I had a kind of a fan base, that I went, wow, maybe I should do another film. So I paid off the film. It only cost me $4,000 to make, and that was all more or less money that I'd earned as I mowed lawns and babysat and worked with my dad during the summers and all that, to pay for the film. 90% of the budget was film. It wasn't anything else.
Right, film stock. Yeah.
Gasoline to drive all around the coast. But you end up, once I got to the point where the film was a huge success, and I got back like 4 times my investment, I went, wow, that's enough to live on. I could actually do this maybe as a business. And I went to my mom and dad with that idea. And this was the summer after my freshman year. And they said, well, what are you thinking about doing? I was saying, well, maybe I should drop out of college for a year and make another movie. And they said, well, why are you asking us? Just go do it. And so it was they were so confident in their kids, me and my 2 sisters, being just fine in the world. And they gave us a wonderful education and wonderful parenting. But, they were, go out and try something. Everyone's going to college. You've got an opportunity to do this film. Go do it. And so I did. And that film turned out even better. And then I went back to college. And then Jim Freeman and I became good friends. And then we thought, okay, we should make a movie together. We'll pool our resources and go to South America to shoot a movie. No one knows anything about South America except Peru.
Right.
And there are a few surfers in Brazil, like 10 or maybe 20 back then. But no one knew anything else about Argentina or Uruguay or Chile or any of the other spots, Ecuador. And so we went down there and tried to make a movie. And by the time we finished shooting after 6 months, our skill set was about 3 or 4 times better.
Right.
Just because we were working together and teaching each other. And we were pushing each other too, in a positive, non-competitive way. But and so then we finished the film in Hawaii and never used any of the South America footage,
right,
because the next footage was so much better. We'd learned probably 3 or 4 years would have taken us to learn all of what we learned at film school. We learned that in 6 months in South America.
And what year was the South America trip?
We went to South America in 66.
66,
and then
okay.
the film Free and Easy came out in '67.
Well, I want to get to Jim Freeman here, but real quick before I forget about it, what was the plan with the physics degree? What was the career plan at the time?
I just love physics. I love the mechanical idea of how does everything work and what are the relationships. And that's what I was good at. And um, I didn't have any real plan.
Right.
Maybe I was going to be a physics teacher, and maybe I was going to be a physicist somewhere, in the space program. I don't know what, but I'm interested in all of that.
Yeah.
And continue today. I subscribe to 3 science magazines and love reading about science.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned Jim Freeman. Your company is MacGillivray Freeman Films. Talk to us about Jim, because for as impactful as a relationship that you had together and as productive as it was unfortunately pretty short over the course of the timeline of your life.
Well, thankfully, we were able to work together for 12 years, and those were the real meaningful years of my career, because, as I said, we pushed each other and worked so well together. We used to say, okay, because the Beatles were out then, and we said, okay, here's 4 guys that are doing it. If you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, they really equal 10. It says maybe you and I, Jim, if we work together, our 1 and 1 will equal 3, not just 2.
Right.
And so we had a confidence in that, and we thought, well, there's not a lot of money in surfing or surfing films, and splitting the profit. Is that enough to live on? We thought, nah, who cares? Let's just do it. Let's just see if we can actually make it work, and try to make the best films that we can do. And that's what Free and Easy was really kind of a big step up in terms of technical quality and beauty, and the interaction of music and beautiful visuals. And then Waves of Change we tried to make as a story film, kind of to be released by a big distributor, American National Enterprises. And so we did that film, and then we decided to move into Hollywood. And I said, well, let's make one final surfing film. And Jim kind of said, okay, well, how are we going to do it though? We're so busy with Hollywood now. We had a contract with United Artists for 4 short films and several feature film projects that were ongoing. Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Towering Inferno and others that had been pitched to us. So you end up going, okay, we're going to do this in a way that is structured so it's in pieces. So I came up with the idea of 5 summer stories, so we could work on one story and it may be only 10 minutes long, and then go work in Hollywood for 6 months, and then come back and do another one. And we got Bud Brown to partner with us, and he went over to Hawaii and spent 4 months the first year, and then 4 months the second year, and did kind of the really amazing things. And because we were experimenting with slow motion at the same time, slowing surfing down hadn't really been done. And we'd done some slow motion, this is 200 frames per second, which is 10 times slower than normal projection. So you really see the beauty of surfing, particularly with the great lighting conditions that you have in Hawaii. And Bud and I trained ourselves to do this in a partnership way, where he would do the water shots with these small cameras that I found, and would shoot 200 frames a second. And then I had a Mitchell camera that I shot with from shore, which would go up to about 600 frames per second with telephoto lenses. And we got some of the most amazing slow motion images that anyone has ever done, including today with these small GoPro cameras that'll shoot that
Right.
fast. And you end up, going, okay, that is so gorgeous. We've got we've got to basically make a film that is so glorious and beautiful to watch. So we kept spending money and money and money. Five Summer Stories became the most expensive surfing film ever, not intentionally. It
Right.
was
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
we just got excited, and we kept making money in Hollywood. So we thought, oh, let's put that money in Five Summer Stories. Then we came up with the idea of let's do it in stereo sound, which had never been done before in any surfing film or any 16 millimeter film, because you couldn't. There was no mechanical aspect to do that. There's no projector that would run that. And so we bought projectors that would run the film, and then we had a separate sound machine that would run the soundtrack in two channels
Right.
in stereo, in sync with the projector, and that was expensive,
Sure.
but man, was it great! I mean, when you went and we would install our own speakers in every one of the theaters, gigantic rock and roll speakers, big things that took you 3 hours to set up, with big amplifiers, and it sounded awesome.
Oh,
So we try to play theaters where we would play 2 or 3 weeks in a row,
right.
um, and the crowds would grow because people go in and they'd hear the sound
Right.
and they'd go, "Wow, this is worth the ticket." Who cares what the movie is? The sound is so good.
Right. That's so interesting. And Jerry Lopez has a film coming out here
Yeah.
very soon, and we spoke to him pretty recently, him and Stacy, and just based on what you were talking about, Jerry was sharing this story about when he kind of moved to Hollywood and was doing movies, and he goes, I was partying a bit, and you get sucked into the scene, and he goes, after a while, he tells the story about missing, a great South Swell because he was like hungover, and he's like, I decided never again am I going to do this. And I'm wondering, as a surfer yourself and just someone who obviously is a huge champion and an appreciator of the outdoors, did you ever struggle like working in Los Angeles, working in Hollywood, or did you not have to kind of reside there as much as maybe, Jerry did during his days?
Well, what Jim and I did, Jim loved driving and he loved going to Hollywood and he loved meeting new people. I love people, but I hate driving to Hollywood and
Right.
spending the time. And, LA to me is just gross. It's just not very pleasant. And so every time I go up to LA, I'm so thankful if I get up there and continue in my good mood. In Laguna Beach
Right. Yeah.
is nothing but good moods.
Sure.
You're down here. You're in beautiful. There are plenty of trees and plenty of beautiful sunsets. So the relationship that Jim and I had was, okay, you go do all the sales in Hollywood and drive up there and do the pitching and all that, and I'll stay down here and edit and write and work with the filmmaking stuff, and
Right.
it worked out great because
Yep.
and then he started developing these skills that were way beyond what I could do, with helicopter photography and aerial stuff with this guy Nelson Tyler, who was a genius inventor, but we established a lot of relationships. Jim was a very caring, smart, wonderful, humorous man, and the way we worked together was so seamless.
Right.
We respected each other so much, and loved each other in a way that was so deep and so important to us. Part of it was that we knew that we each respected and loved filmmaking so much. We we really wanted to make the very best and most artistic film we could, regardless of money and cost and how it, how the bottom line turned out.
Mm.
If we were able to do it, we were going to go there and do it.
Right.
And it's interesting because people talk to me today and say, well, that's a philosophy now. Just do it until you get it right, and the money will follow. That's a business philosophy almost. Steve Jobs thought that way, and other people have thought that way. And you end up going, well, we accidentally thought that way, and we didn't really think it out. We just
Right.
knew we wanted to make the best films possible, and it worked, and we got more jobs, and so did I ever get sucked in like Jerry felt he was to the Hollywood scene? There's an allure,
Sure.
it's fun to be around Hollywood actors and stars who, people that are famous, and that was always fun, but it wasn't something that we ever got sucked into. It was kind of a charge,
Right.
but we never got into, because we're 60 miles away, never got into the social scene,
Sure.
where Jerry was probably up there living at Milius's place or
Right.
living somewhere close by. So it wasn't really a struggle to get up there.
Yeah.
But it's always fun. I was with Milius about a month ago at a tribute for the composer Basil Polidorus, who was one of my dear friends. And John was there, and so we got together, and it was old home week.
Right.
It was a charge. And Milius is a wonderful man. He's unfortunately struck down by a stroke.
Mm.
He lost some of his capabilities, but still has the heart of a lion, and
Right.
wonderful guy.
Well, I'm glad I was going to bring that up too, because I suppose the positive of being associated with Hollywood and that industry is you take a look at your own filmography, and you've worked on some of the most impactful films and with some of the most creatively genius people ever. You talked about John Milius is obviously associated with Apocalypse Now and Red Dawn and Big Wednesday for our purposes, but looking at the other films you worked on, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining or Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, I mean, it's for as much as you undoubtedly provided to them on their films, I'm sure there were elements of their creativity that you were able to take back into your projects.
Oh, yeah. I learned so much from working with Kubrick, and the in fact, the Blade Runner thing was sort of funny because it came from Kubrick.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Ridley Scott and his producer on Blade Runner were having a squabble over how to end that film, and the film was due in a month to be in theaters, and so Ridley called Kubrick, and Kubrick said, "Well, call Greg MacGillivray. He can probably help you." And that was my association with Blade Runner. I went up and had a meeting with Ridley Scott and I think it was Mike Medavoy, the producer, and I could tell that they were at each other's necks. They wanted to kill each other. But I was sort of the mediator in this meeting. It's like, hey guys, you got a good ending already, but if you think it has to have a more peaceful moment, I could go out and shoot a shot for you.
Right.
Or I said, you can buy a shot from Stanley Kubrick, because I just, had worked on The Shining, and we shot millions of miles of footage.
Right.
And I said, there's a shot that I know about, and I'll tell you about it, that would work great. And Kubrick could probably just give it to you. And they went, oh, well. And so anyway, that was my involvement in the Blade Runner.
I thought you were going to say, I told them that Deckard's the replicant, and that's how it ended.
Yeah.
So it's so good. Tell me, you are rightly credited with developing, the multi-camera technique to IMAX. Tell me how you got involved in that particular style of filmmaking, and when and how.
Well, the thing, Jim and I had read articles about IMAX way back in 1970. It began as a World Fair kind of film system, um, using film that's 10 times bigger than the film Hollywood uses, so 10 times bigger than 35 millimeter, projecting with a Rolls Royce kind of projector where the images are so steady and sharp on the screen, and you can sit really close to the screen that you feel like you're in the movie. It's not 3D, you're in it already. You feel like you're there. And we'd read about this and we said, oh my God, if we ever get a chance to do this, we've got to do it. And lo and behold, 2 years later, the Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian in Washington, calls us up, and it's they say we've seen your footage from the air, we've seen your movies, we love them, we feel you're right to make this movie. It's our premiere movie here at the Air and Space Museum in this system called IMAX, and we go, well, IMAX, we know that,
Right.
and so this was the fourth theater to be built in the IMAX network, and we started work on To Fly in '74. We just done Five Summer Stories, um, and we kind of took the point of view of how do we do this in a way that's not too serious, because people are going to be in Washington. This is bicentennial year,
Right.
76. They're going to be barraged by content and storytelling history, celebrating the 200th anniversary of America. Let's give them a film that is joyful and almost like our surfing films are, visually beautiful and lots of wonderful music, but but show them the joy of flight in a way that they've never seen it before. And so we designed this film. Um, we engaged a number of writers. Um, we went out and shot it. And then when it came out and the Air and Space Museum opened in '76, instantly it became a gigantic hit in Washington. And
Right.
the reviews were off the chart. And just a 26-minute movie, only 26 minutes, because they wanted to turn the audience every half hour. They wanted to get the audience in and out and show it every half hour. And they did that because the audience numbers were gigantic. The line would go around the block. And they were charging, when they began, 50 cents to see the movie. And they were so embarrassed they were making so much money that they reduced the price after 6 months to 25 cents.
Might be the only time in history that's ever happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And they felt, oh, this is going to be embarrassing if we show that much profit.
Right.
And so Jim and I were stoked, and unfortunately, right then at that same moment, Jim was killed in a helicopter crash. So he never really did see that first IMAX film on the giant screen. We saw it here at our office, where we've got a big 35 millimeter screen and a 70 millimeter projector for smaller images, but never saw it in its true glory with all the beautiful sound and beautiful picture. It was just the saddest thing in the world. And, after we slaved for 2 years to make that movie, and you end up, when you go through, the number of films that Jim and I made together, which was probably close to 20 different kinds of films, and films with different subjects and different themes, and the things that we learned from each other. I think about Jim all the time. After every movie, I go, okay, what would Jim do now? What would he think was the most important part of this movie, and how do you make that even better? Because that's what we used to do together, and have such fun doing it. Like, do you think we could do this? And yeah, let's try.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it's as tragic as it was that it was cut short. It was such a productive and important 12 years that you guys got to work together, and you continue to honor him in MacGillivray Freeman films. So I'm going to have to restrain myself on more questions about your life. Otherwise, I'm sure your publicist is going to murder me in my sleep. But everyone should absolutely check out 500 Summer Stories of Life in IMAX. Greg's memoir, which is coming out. We're going to take one more break and we'll come back for our final segment. So flash forwarding to today, MacGillivray Freeman Films is in some way a bit of a family business. You get to work with your family. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got 25 people that have been working with us for, the past several decades. But now it's run by my son, Sean, named after Sean Thompson, by the way.
Right.
Same spelling. And you end up, he's the president of the company, and he's doing a fantastic job and has been doing so for about 15 years already.
Yeah.
And my daughter is the production manager. When she came to work, she said, do you think you have a job? And I said, well, I'm going to give you the hardest job, and it's production management. And she's done it better than anyone I've ever worked with. And it's a joy. And so Barbara and I, my wife Barbara and I, travel together, and the kids are with us. And that started way back when, we were making our IMAX films, when the kids were born in 80 and 83. And they end up, all through that 80s and 90s, we were doing constant IMAX films, one after the next, As IMAX was growing, our filmmaking styles and the kind of equipment that we were developing for those filmmaking challenges was growing and getting better and better. And leading all the way till 98 when we released Everest, which is still the number one IMAX film.
Right.
And the and then for the last 20 years since that time, we've continued on. And even today, like I said, we're doing flying films, and we're doing all kinds of experiential and experimental filmmaking techniques, including something that we're doing now, which is a gigantic screen. It's like the equivalence of stapling 10 IMAX screens all around you.
Oh, wow.
Except they're all LED screens. So all like your gigantic TV set at home, but all seamless. And so you can feel underwater or flying or doing anything, but you basically feel like you're in the scene more than even IMAX.
Wow.
Allows you to do. And so you end up, and this is something I think is going to really be successful. And I can't tell you much about it because it's secret.
Sure.
In 6 months, I can tell you a lot.
Yeah, right.
Can show it to you. But we're in the final throes of finishing these films that we've done that are shown on these gigantic screens. And that'll be fun to see. And so we've been doing all of these experiential kind of moments, whether it be circle vision or 3D or IMAX or dome screens that come over your head.
Yeah. For
the past, 40 or 50 years. And it's been a real joy because, the next project is always completely different than the previous. So you never get bored. Yeah. And as a creator or a filmmaker, you're stoked. I mean, it's just like when we did with 5 Summer Stories. We try to take big leaps with every film that we do.
Let's talk about Everest for a segment because it's pulling on a fairly recent thread of interest for me. My kids got me into climbing pretty recently, and like tumbled down the rabbit hole of like I'm going to watch The Alchemist and I'm going to watch 14 Peaks and all the and I was struck by you're always trying to find comparisons, especially for something that's fairly niche and bespoke like surfing. But I, in sort of digesting a lot of this content and taking baby steps into this community, it does feel like the closest one to surfing in the way that, I could watch the Dawn Wall with Tommy Caldwell and hear him talk about dedicating, 20 years of his life to this piece of rock, and then immediately think of, the pipeline surfers, the specialists that dedicate their life. And I'm wondering if you agree with that, and then B, if you've noticed that just working in both communities.
Yeah. One of the fun things, and I just along the same vein that you're talking about, when we first began Everest, and I decided to make a film about the Himalayas, we didn't know at the beginning that it was going to be a climbing film. I just thought, tallest mountains in the world,
right?
Most gigantic screens in the world, great marriage. Let's make this movie. And I threw my own money into it, and so we joined the American Himalayan Society and went to their first big event, a fundraiser gala thing. And when we did so, Barbara and I looked at each other and went, these climbers, they're like surfers. They're exactly like surfers. They're
right.
pure. They're focused, so they're riveted to their sport in a way that is so intense, and they're in love with what they do, just like surfers. And I said, and they're healthy, they eat right, they exercise
Right.
all the time, all that stuff. And so you end up going, okay, these people we love, we can feel for them. And as time went on, and I met David Brashears and Jamling Norgay and others, this intensity grew, and so we decided to design a film that was a climbing film, a structurally, quest film where you don't know if you're going to succeed or not, but that's part of the joy of the filmmaking, and
Right.
that's the joy of the storytelling too, and that's why climbers do it. They don't know they can do it. It'd never be as much fun if they knew if it was easy. They wouldn't do it, and so basically they were doing the hard things, not the easy things, and we enjoyed that, and so we started the film and got a wonderful team together, the best team on the mountain. We sent most of our team to Everest the year before to train. Basically, we developed this new IMAX camera, which was more lightweight and would work at minus 40 degrees, so it wouldn't just screw up when you got to the top.
Right. Yeah.
And then my main goal was, okay, tell a great story, but also get images from the top of the world, looking down on the rest of us. And so we needed to succeed on both. And sure enough, when David and the team went in 95 and then went back in 96 to climb in earnest, we had the greatest team, best doctors, best equipment, best communication. We were the best funded because we didn't want to fail in our attempt to make the movie.
Sure.
We had to get great images, but we didn't have to get to the top of the mountain. We had enough money to come back in '97 to just get the final summit images if we didn't get them that first year.
Right.
And it looked like we weren't going to get them because the tragedy started. The storm blew in, killed 8 people in one night. Some of David's best friends were killed, and you end up going, okay, this is all over for this season. But and this is what happens on mountains sometimes. But the storytelling continued because David and the team developed the perseverance to do it again, to try again. and they succeeded, and so we were able to make this movie that really did tell the story of human quest and the deep heart of men for each other, kind of this the brotherhood of the rope, they call it, where
Sure.
you're depending on someone else for your own life and vice versa. And you end up really in a different zone than what we exist on here at sea level or
Yeah.
in a non-tension pressure cooker situation. Up there, it's different. You know, you feel like you're so far away from everything else that you're on the moon. Um, and the distances are vast, but they're even more vast because your energy level is so diminished by
Yeah.
low oxygen. Um, it's not a trivial place to go. Um, and unfortunately, a lot of people die because they think it's easy. It's
Hmm.
not. It's not. It's not an easy mountain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that idea of, I mean, it echoes your comment from the beginning, which is maybe a great way to bring it full circle, right? Which is, you know, you can be at this elevation, you can be so disconnected from the everyday humdrum of reality or life. Similarly with surfing, and that felt like a core message for Five Summer Stories. Do you think that you know we've talked about how things have changed, but there are a lot of things that are still truisms? Do you think that when audiences get exposed to Five Summer Stories, you know, 50 years down the track for the first time, that message is going to resonate with them in 2022, 2023?
I think it does. You know, we've had a number of screenings, and people come out of the theater like they did when the film premiered. They go, you know, I can't believe how great that experience was. And really, 50% of it is the music. Um,
Sure.
the visual imagery and the storytelling is really good, but the music is really, really good. And you end up just being captivated by that time period. And, you know, thankfully with Honk, you know, who wrote so much of the brilliant music, and the Beach Boys, of course, but you end up with uh, these pieces of music that take you back instantly. I mean, with whether it's the pipeline sequence, which became surprisingly to all of us the big hit.
Right.
You know, I always thought that "Love You, Baby," you know, made my statement was going to be the big hit,
Yep.
but everyone loved pipeline sequence,
Sure.
and it's so much fun to hear. And those guys wrote that in a strange way, um, in about they say it. We wrote it faster than it takes to play it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. Sure.
You know what happened? I don't know if we have time for this, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what ended up happening was we were recording the soundtrack up in Hollywood, and they'd written something for the pipeline sequence, and I they we put it down on tape, and I went, well, I love that song. I love what you've done there. It's an instrumental piece, but it won't work for pipeline because it's not hard hitting enough. It's too slow, and it's just not tension enough. And I said, this is a radical place. This is a you know death defying surfing spot with fast action. So we need something. And right then, the song Shaft, you know, which has this percussion beat that starts. And I said, you know, think of Shaft. Shaft was a big hit right then,
Right. Yeah.
and maybe you start that way and percussive, and then the electric guitars come in really solid, and but you know, I've got to go and take a meeting. I'll be back in a couple hours,
Right. Yeah.
and so I did that and came back, and they said, well, what do you think of this? And I listened to it. And I went, oh my God, that is better than I ever expected. And so they did that call and answer thing. Da, 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 da. And I went, okay, for our stereo reproduction in the theaters, that's going to be awesome because I can go da-da-da-da over there, da-da-da-da over there.
Right, right.
It'd just be so much fun. And when people heard that and they heard the stereo aspect, they yelled and screamed. I mean, it was so exciting. So that piece of music was done almost by accident, but it's still every time I listen to it, it has enough creativity and newness in it that I never tire of it.
Oh, amen to that. I'm a huge advocate of everyone watching this for the first time or rewatching it again and again and again.
Yeah.
We did reach out for questions from our Instagram community at the Lineup Pod. We got quite a few back. You're a very interesting person to all of our listeners, but we've whittled it down to 3. The first question is from Philip Bensek. Sorry, I probably butchered that. The question is, what was the weight of your equipment back then? I'm presuming they mean, when you were filming 5 Summer Stories.
Yeah. Well, the big high-speed camera from shore was it was big, and so it had to go on a big tripod, but it was probably just 25 pounds. Whereas our IMAX cameras are, 300 pounds. So it was still relatively small. But the key thing was the water cameras. And we developed one water camera that it was the first high-speed water camera that had so many batteries in it to run it really fast that it was really weighty. And so I built enough air pockets in it so that it would be semi-buoyant.
Right.
And wouldn't pull you down to the bottom if you got in a wipeout. But you end up, that was the first one. And then Bud Brown figured out a way, and that was probably 40 pounds, which it's heavy.
Right, yeah.
The one that Bud Brown said, okay, maybe what I should do is use a smaller battery pack. I said, yeah. And maybe it'll only be good for one roll of film. So I need to build a bunch of water. So we had like 4 or 5 battery packs that would go on the bottom of the camera. And then he built this with a shower cap and rubber and surgical hosing and a lens port about this big. He built this thing that was like putting a rubberized thing around a camera. So it wasn't hard. It was soft. And then tying it off. So every time you wanted to change film, you had to come to shore and dry everything off and then pull the camera out and do the whole thing. But it was unlike a plexiglass housing, which was bigger and more rigid. He said, what I can do then is swim underneath the waves at Pipeline. So even a 20-foot wave, I can get deep enough with this thing between my leg and I'm kicking with my flippers.
Right.
And Bud Brown, we called him the Barracuda. He was the best swimmer ever.
Right, yeah.
Although he was, at the time, he was 60 and I was 30. So he was double my age, but he swam like a fish. And he'd get under these waves. And so we'd go under the first wave, get in position and reach down and grab his camera, which was kind of hanging around his belt. And he had a wetsuit on. It was a shorty. And he'd kick like heck to keep himself above the water line. And the front plate would automatically, because it was a piece of glass, it would clear itself of water and water droplets as he pulled the camera out.
Right.
And he'd just aim it with a wide lens and nothing to look through. He'd just aim it. And he experimented with aiming, so he knew how to aim properly. And it was great. And he would go out there with just 100 feet of film, which was good for maybe two rides. And then he'd have to swim all the way back in. I'd help him reload the camera and then go all the way back out. So every routine would be like an hour. So maybe he'd shoot 2 rolls a day, and on shore I could shoot 4 rolls. So it's a
Amazing.
different deal.
Yeah,
So, but the cameras were relatively light in relationship to our IMAX cameras, which are gigantically heavy.
certainly. Well, the next question is from @TreeHatJ, who asks, "What is your biggest pet peeve or annoyance that you have on set and while filming, and how do you handle it?"
You know, I suppose the biggest annoyance I always have, because we're shooting IMAX and you need high contrast, is the clouds coming over and reducing the contrast. Now, if you're shooting a feature film, you love clouds because it softens the shadows. Your actors look great. They look far better in overcast lighting. It's different with IMAX because you want hard shadows and contrast. And so I always get annoyed when the clouds come in
Right.
and try to figure out, okay, what are we going to do now? We've got 3 hours of clouds. Let's go shoot something close up where we can actually add light and get more contrast. So that's my biggest annoyance. You know, in Hollywood, you're annoyed by some of your actors who get
Right.
to be a little egocentric and kind of annoyingly um, demanding.
Sure. Yeah.
I've worked with a few like that. Thankfully, in the IMAX realm, we don't have to do that too often.
Right. The last question we've curated from our Instagram following is from @2coolformegan, who asks, "What is the most epic nature experience you've had while you were making films?"
Ooh, there have been so many. I think making the most epic thing for me, I guess, would be making National Parks Adventure just for the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, um, which was 2016. We traveled around the national parks and shot a movie with Conrad Anker and his son Max Lowe, and their family friend Rachel Powell, and the three of them as characters, um, each of whom I admire to the hilt. They're wonderful human beings, immensely talented and fun to be around, and hardworking. You end up with a joy because our family unit was so solid. My daughter leading the cause. Um, we had 7 vehicles, 2 big trucks in that 7, just filled with camera equipment, including the gigantic IMAX 3D camera. And it was a joy. Every day was a joy. I mean, we would be up at 3:30 in the morning leaving to get to location at 4:30 where we could do a sunrise at 5:30 or 6, and we'd shoot all day and then get up and do the same thing. But you're in these glorious situations. You're at Bryce Canyon or Zion Canyon or Devil's Tower in Wyoming. And you're filming things that people deserve to see, and capturing them in this massive format that will show them the scale and the size and the beauty of that situation. Um, so that was a real peak experience for me, just in terms of being in the magnificence of nature and the fact that we've saved these places for all of humanity forever. The national parks were never done before we invented that system
Right.
100 years ago. And, in Europe, all the cool places were owned by the kings
Yep.
or the rich people.
Right.
And here, thankfully, Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir and others saved those natural wonders for you and for me and for everyone, regardless of your status. And that was a cool story to tell.
That's a great answer. And thanks to everyone who wrote in questions at the lineup pod. We're now down to our final segment. It's time for the lightning round. So these are 10 questions for you to answer as quickly as you can. If you could only have one surfboard setup for the rest of your life, a single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad bonzer, or finless, which would you choose?
Single fin.
Coffee or tea?
Tea today. Coffee before like 20 years ago.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito, of course. Fish burrito.
Last book you read?
Oh, I'm actually reading Oliver Stone's Chasing the Light, which is a wonderful story of filmmaking.
Best surf film ever?
I think The Endless Summer is. The reason is that it's the best story told by probably the best storyteller. Bruce Brown, no one can match his narration. You know, he had this lightness of personality that comes through with his narration. And it's a true surfer's personality. You know, like I don't care about anything kind of personality. Yeah. And he was one of the funniest men I've ever been around.
What is one wave you never have to go back to?
Don't have to go back to. Well, I never surfed Mavericks, but when I was out there filming from the water, from a boat and then from a surfboard too, that's a scary place.
Right.
You know, it breaks all over the place, and it's a wave that if you get underneath it, you're not only going to be pushed down like you're pushed down at Pipeline or Sunset, but you're going to be pulled down by this suction that's surprising to you. And I've only experienced a couple wipeouts that have been truly frightening to me in terms of almost killing me. But I'd hate to be there and feel that suck, you know, where you're expecting to come up and you're just going the wrong way. You're being pulled down.
That's a great answer. If you only get to surf one wave for the rest of your life, where would it be?
Well, I live right at Dahlia Street in Laguna, and it's not my favorite wave I've ever ridden, but it's where I know. And so it would have to be Thalia Street. The reef there is so nice. I'm a regular foot, so I love going right.
Best person to share a lineup with?
Oh, you know, I thought it was really interesting that Jerry Lopez in his film admits what a wave hog he is.
Right.
and I think probably the best guy would be Mark Martinson,
Right.
who is not only one of the funniest men I've ever been around, he's also one of the most generous and actually smartest. So I think I've had more fun surfing around him than anyone. Yeah.
Worst person to share a lineup with?
Oh, probably Jerry Lopez.
There you go. Yeah, he admitted it, so that's fine. Yeah.
He used to give me waves when we were in El Salvador on Big Wednesday. He would take off on everyone, but for some reason, one wave. I remember a day at Sunsal where it was maybe 7 feet, and I got this nice ride, and he was on the shoulder, ready to take off, and he didn't. And you know, I thought, okay, that's nice. You know, I get to ride this wave all on my own. He would have ripped it, you know.
All right, last one. Finish this sentence. I will next achieve a state of happiness by.
Oh, by probably swimming with my mask and snorkel and seeing all the fish outside where I live in Laguna. And those fish weren't there 20 years ago before the marine protected area was put in. They were diminished. When we moved in 50 years ago, there were a lot of fish. And then it slowly diminished over the decades, and then came back when the marine protected area was established about 8 years ago. And now it's a huge success story. Fish are back, the lobster are back, the abalone are even coming back. And that's a true, science at work, making our lives better.
It's very cool. Greg MacGillivray, it's been a huge honor. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We hope all the listeners go and check out 5 Summer Stories, and also check out your memoir, 500 Summer Stories. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and hope to catch up in person down the track.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Good questions.
Thank you.